Hi, everyone. I'm Diyi. I'm a first-year assistant professor at Georgia Tech. So actually, until today, this is still my third month at Georgia Tech. I can't tell you too much about it, but I can share some of the research that I did during my PhD stage. So today, the title is Building Language Technologies for Better Social Systems. So we humans, we are group animals, and we use online communities, social systems to achieve all sorts of social goals. For example, on Twitter, we promote ourselves. On Facebook, we write posts to share our stories with families, friends. And we also kind of work together to kind of contribute to Wikipedia articles and also learn together, chat together, even seeking social support together. So as a result, the language interaction recorded in text format is growing exponentially. For example, between human and human in different formal, informal, even semi-formal venues. Every second on Twitter, 6,000 tweets, English tweets are being generated, and monthly there are over 2 billion users on Facebook. Not only between human and human, between human and machines such as bots, agents, it's also increasing a lot. Given this growing amount of data coming from communications, we must make sure that our technology can better support and serve human communication in a reasonable and human-like way, not like something funny or machinable. So I'm going to show you a video here.
Finally meet you. I haven't been on a blind date in a while. So, Doug told me you work in customer service.
That's right. I do the voice recordings for companies such as United Airlines, Blue Cross, and Amtrak.
Wow, Amtrak, huh? Well, then I guess I have talked to you before.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Oh. Would you like to maybe see a movie tonight?
I'd like that. Let me check the movie listings. What movie would you like to see?
Have you seen Flight Plan?
Let me look that up for you. 1 second, please. Here it is. Flight Plan is playing at 7:15, 8:45, 10 o'clock, and 11:15.
Let's do 7:15.
Okay. This is a great date.
Anyway,
Okay. I think we can stop here. So basically what this story tells us is that natural language communication contains both content and interpersonal information. For example, in the previous conversation, we get all the questions answered correctly. Like when do you want to see a movie and what would you like to do? So as a question answering system, we get all the answers correct, but it's still something funny to human. What's that? It's more about the interpersonal dimension here. So then my research argued that getting the content correct is not enough. And there has been a lot of research in the NLP community that focus on natural language processing more on the content side and relatively less work on understanding the social dimension of language. However, as you can see, it is impossible to separate the language and the social dimensions. So for this purpose, we turn to systemic functional linguistics proposed by Michael Holliday. The idea here is that we want to study, it provides social perspectives to study how language is used in different social settings. And basically, there are several meta functions. And especially here, I look at 2 of them, which are very easy to kind of computationally model and operationalize. The first one is called interpersonal semantics. So this meta function mainly look at personal relations or social relations. It suggests that language enables us to cooperate, form bond, negotiate, or even ask for things. So usually this involves the understanding of speech acts, conversational acts, emotion, argument, humor, persuasion, politeness, and subjectivity in text. For example, this is an example I got from a recent paper talking about style transfer. For the same set of meaning, I could say, please be quiet, the talk will begin shortly. Or I could say, shut up, the talk is starting. So although the content there is the same, but for audience, it have totally different effect. The second dimension here is called ideational semantics. So this mental function looks at the experience of our outer and inner world. It reflects the social process in which the language is used, and then looks more at the human experience and then some bigger concepts revealed by our language. For example, we pay more attention to how language reveal our social roles, influence power dynamics, identity, structure, culture, and even political ideology here. So those are the main themes of my research, basically like a language plus social, and also the main topic of today's talk. And as you can see, given the intertwined relation between language, social, and the linguistics, one cannot solve those problems by just using methods in one subject. So this is just like a very brief overview of my research methodology. I always begin with identifying important social problems in computational social situations and then constructing theories or categories to model them. Then I develop methods in machine learning and natural language processing to formulate such problems and then measure them in a computational way. I also evaluate and validate them through HCI type of methods. Again, this is a repeated cycle so that we can always adapt and adjust our solutions for new situations. So in today's talk, I'm going to focus on three topics. The first one is about modeling persuasion in language, and then I will talk about how we could identify social roles of users in online health communities, as well as a deployment that we did. So to begin with, let's talk about modeling persuasion in language to support loans on crowdfunding websites. So persuasive communication is everywhere. We are very familiar with it. Statistics show that every day, every person see around 300 to 3,000 messages that try to persuade you. From your parents try to convince you to eat green vegetables, to your professors want you to work on your homework. So persuasion shapes our attitude and behaviors and has been widely used in advertising, political campaign, and loan request. So in this work, we mainly look at how persuasion works in good faith crowdfunding context. So here we choose Kiva. Kiva is the largest peer-to-peer lending platform in US, so that we can better understand the persuasion strategies that people use when advocating for loan requests. So here is one advocacy message from Kiva. So the person wrote, "I am the first lender on this woman-led group loan in Burma. This loan will be utilized to repair her old duck farm and enable her to purchase nutritious duck feed that can help boost duck egg production. This way she will be able to support her children's education in the future." We know from the log that this request has persuaded 3 out of 50 people to lend. But why it leads people to give? Instead of building classifiers to predict whether a request is going to succeed or not, here we want to figure out what are some explicit strategies or acts in the language that make it persuasive. And we are going to answer 3 questions for this problem. First, what are some widely used persuasion strategies, and how can we computationally model them, and how it influences the request success? So there has been a lot of work in argumentation where people look at the relational structures about claims, evidence. However, persuasion differs from them that it focuses more about language cues, framings that shape, reinforce, or change people's attitude. So in this work, if you remember my kind of generic methodology, we are going to use some theories from psychology to kind of explain this problem. As Kahneman said in his Nobel Prize-winning book, when people are evaluating messages, there are 2 systems going on. System 1 is fast and emotional, so you rely on very superficial cues in language to make decisions, such as, oh, only a few left, or expert recommended it, so I should do it as well, or people who I like are using it. In contrast, system 2 is slower, more deliberative, and more logic, so people carefully evaluate the facts the concreteness in the language and ask questions like, are those facts correct, or are the conclusions warranted from the description? We took advantage of this line of neural processing theory from psychology and to understand the effect of persuasion. So for example, when people are writing a loan request, if they focus more about like the borrower appearance, that belongs to the emotional or the fast thinking, versus if they look carefully about the numbers or the argument there. In the following, I'm going to translate those persuasion theories into something that we can measure from language. The first one used a lot in advertisement is called scarcity. It says that people value an item more when it becomes rare or urgent. So if I see only 1 day left, or this loan is going to expire in 35 minutes, please help. The second dimension here is emotion. That is, messages full of emotional valence make people care and then take actions. So instead, I could see the picture of widow Bernice holding her baby in front of a meager home, brings tears to my eye. So it's trying to create a miserable atmosphere here. We also introduce identity here. That is, people like their group or identity more than others. So they try to highlight those common identity when they try to sell this loan to you. For example, for those of you who in our team who love bread, here is a loan about bakery. So it's trying to emphasizing the commonality. The last thing here, we call it a commitment. That is, we like to convince others once we did something. For example, once you think something is good, you also want to convince your friends that this thing is correct. For example, people will mention that we loaned to her already, indicating that you may want to also consider that. So those 4 acts belong to thinking fast categories, which are all like superficial cues. We also considered concreteness here. That is, whether the request is providing concrete facts or evidence about the loan itself, such as she wishes to have a septic tank and toilet and is now 51% risk and needs another $125. Lastly, we introduced a dimension called impact. That is, people try to emphasize or pointing out explicitly about the importance or bigger impact of a loan, such as she can provide a better education for her daughter. So inspired by those theories and also data representation in our corpus, we ended up with 6 persuasion acts in language. It's worth mentioning that there are also other persuasion tactics, such as authority, like people from a higher status trying to see something, then you are more likely to say yes. We did not find enough representation, data representation from our corpus, so we ended up with those 6. So the next question is, how can we computationally model persuasion? In a straightforward manner, we can annotate some amount of sentences in those messages and then train classifiers to predict the persuasion strategy. However, this is time-consuming and expensive. Instead, we want to ask a question like whether we could predict the persuasion strategy with only a few limited data points, that is, in a semi-supervised manner. From a model perspective, we are interested in how to design models for semi-supervised learning with some of the global supervision. Remember, in our case, for each message, we know how many people it persuaded. And then we have partially labeled data for the sentence-level persuasion strategies. So this is a very traditional semi-supervised setting that is widely used today in NLP machine learning CV. Take our context, for example. A typical setting is that we have a limited amount of labeled sentences with their corresponding persuasion strategies, and we have extra large amount of unlabeled sentences. However, in our setting, remember that for a set of messages, we also have their corresponding document-level labels, that is how persuasive this message is. Then we propose this semi-supervised setting with document-level supervision. The intuition is that we want to use the document-level labels to supervise the learning of sentence-level strategies. So similar ideas have been used in computer vision setting where people try to use the global image labels, try to infer the pixel level labels or bounding box of objects. So taking that into account, we introduced a very simple model here. So first, we use any sentence encoder to process each word in a sentence to get the context into some hidden representations. And then in order to learn the characteristic words associated with different persuasion strategy, we also introduced a attention mechanism here. We assume that each sentence only use one type of persuasion strategy, so we can use the high-level representation to predict the label of each sentence. After getting the sentence vector, we can get a document-level representation in a similar way. We also introduce the attention mechanism here to measure the importance of each persuasion strategy. So finally, if you look at the overall structure, in our loss function, there will be two parts. The first part is always about the overall regression problem. That is, we try to predict how persuasive a message is. And then at a lower level or sentence level, we also have partially loss associated with the sentence classification. We also add some contextual factors, which I right as C there, try to do a better job at predicting the document level persuasion document level persuasiveness. So we use the 42,000 advocacy messages from Kiva. Yes. Yes, so for each sentence, we assume that it has one type of persuasion strategy. And if there is no persuasion strategy, we label it as other. So overall, it's like a 7-class classification at a sentence level for sentences that have labels. Okay, so we collaborated with Kiva and then got 42,000 public messages from Kiva discussion board. And then we annotated the 3,000 sentences with persuasion strategies on Amazon Mechanic Turk. So here we show the results of predicting persuasion strategies with only sentence level data. So we experimented with classical baselines and also neural networks. And as we can see, we gained a lot in terms of accuracy when switching to neural network. When we incorporate the document level labels here with sentence level labels, we get a reasonable performance for predicting the document level persuasiveness, indicated by the RMSE there, and a little bit decrease in terms of the strategy prediction performance. When using supervision from the global document, we get a much better performance compared to our baselines, both in terms of a sentence level accuracy together with the document level RMSE. So people can easily change what the specific implementation of those cells in this work. We also added more context features. For example, how many people are there, whether people are active in giving loans to others, in the overall persuasive prediction layer. As we can see, it reduced the RMSE, which means that it can help predict the document level persuasiveness, but it didn't boost the performance at a sentence level prediction. We also found that adding more unlabeled data to our semi-supervised model increased the accuracy, as well as adding more labeled sentences. So here, I visualized some learned lexicons by looking at words with highest attention from the prediction. We see that they are very reasonable for explaining the persuasion strategies, such as, like in the emotion category, you'll see words such as great, hard, or happy. And then for impact, it could be improve, better, products, use. So in the last several minutes, I'm going to talk about how those persuasion strategies explain request success more from an explainable manner by applying our models to all messages on this platform. Yes. Yes, so the agreement is around 0.45 in terms of the intra-class correlation. So I agree with you that this is a subjective task. When we do this on Amazon Mechanic Turk, we did a qualification test That is, before anyone can work on this task, they need to go through this qualification. On the qualification page, we provide a definition of each persuasion strategy. We also provide several examples associated with the definition. We introduced 2 or 3 questions so that when the reader read those descriptions, they need to answer those set of questions. Only when they achieve full marks by answering those, they are qualified to do our task. So that's how we kind of control the quality here. And it helps a lot with the data agreement. Okay, so here we build a very simple linear regression model by looking at how much are the persuasion strategy used in each sentence. We also controlled for a lot of factors. We found that mentioning shared identity, expressing concreteness, and yes, those 2 kind of help your request fulfilled. If you mention the limited amount of time, they didn't help here in this context. So the explanation is that when you look at those requests, most of the requests that mention scarcity in fact expire in like less than 1 hour, and that time is not enough for people to kind of look at the request and then make actions. So another thing that we did is to generalize this work to an out-of-domain context. So we further applied our model to another context called the random acts of pizza. I guess you all had a free pizza just now. So in this subreddit, people write a request and then to convince strangers to give them free pizza. And as you can see from this example, the person wrote, my wife and I have been sick for the past week while working and taking care of our daughter. So basically this person described his experience, and then this is a request. We look at all these kind of requests, and then we know whether it succeeds or not based on the conversations, and then we can kind of look at what persuasion strategy they use at each sentence, and then try to predict whether it gets succeed or not. So here we show the odds ratio, and as you can see on this platform, if people mention concreteness, like their experience, mentioning emotional sense, like a miserable life, or have 3 deadlines that night, and then also mention scarcity. In this case, it's more urgency. So some people will write like, I haven't eaten in 2 days, all sorts of framing here. It's actually like a very effective for this context. So taking those this experiment and also the previous Kiva experiment into consideration, the takeaway message here is that those persuasion strategies are differently effective for different contexts. It's not that one is always right for or good. It's more about like using it in a proper context, and even to consider who are your audience when you use different persuasion strategy. So to give a brief summary here, in this work, we introduced a set of persuasion strategies, and we also introduced semi-supervised nets with document-level supervisions, and we showed that they are differently effective for different contexts. Okay, so now we have shared our research on how to model good faith persuasion strategies or language use. But what if we have some unwanted persuasion or unwanted framing? How could we get rid of them? So in a recent work with my collaborators, we look at inappropriate subjectivity, also called framing bias. So this refers to that when people are writing scientific articles, they introducing attitude through framing, presupposing truth. And then specifically, we look at Wikipedia. So on Wikipedia, so here's an example. So when editors edit the article, and then they will submit a summary. In the summary, some editors will mention that I did this edit because I tried to fix the framing bias or the neutral point of view issues. So this is how we get our ground truth label. And then we collect a lot of examples from this context where we have the text that identified as suffering from subjectivity bias. We also have the corresponding text with neutral point of view. So in the corpus that we introduced, we have over 180,000 sentence pairs. So here are some of them. So For example, Go is the deepest game in the world versus it's only one of the deepest game versus the authors expose on nutrition studies. A factual way is the author's statement on nutrition studies. So based on these corpus, we also introduced the two baseline models here for automatically neutralizing text. So the first system is actually a modular system. So we first kind of try to train this tagger. The tagger will try to predict for a given sentence which portion of the text may be biased. And then we kind of concatenate that prediction together with our encoder representation to jointly as input for the decoder. That's the first kind of pipeline system. And then the second system we call the concurrent, which use just like a simple encoder-decoder framework. But for the encoder side, we replace it with BERT. We saw that the modular algorithm actually can give people more control and interpretability because it will visualize which potential words may be biased, framing biased. And then the concurrent algorithm here is very simple to train and operate. So they both achieved the good performance in terms of reducing bias, preserving the meaning, and the fluency of the original text. As we can see, the modular network, which is more like the detector here, does a better job at reducing bias. But the concurrent network appears to be better at preserving the meaning and the fluency of the original text. We further apply the model to some out-of-domain data set. As you can see, it still do a reasonable job of reducing or neutralizing the text, such as activists have filed a lawsuit versus critics of it. And Zuckerberg claimed the Facebook account versus Zuckerberg stated Facebook account. So it's kind of providing a certain amount of neutralization to the text. And the corpus will be released soon, and feel free to use it for more complicated models or interesting findings. So any questions until this point? Okay, so the second part I want to talk about, another line of research is more about NLP with healthcare. So here we look at modeling social roles to support patient communication in online health communities. So this work is a collaboration with American Cancer Society. It's conducted on its Cancer Survivor Network. So for people who are not familiar with Cancer Survivor Network, it is an online health support group where patients and their caregivers gather together to share experience, ask questions, and provide information to each other. We were given permission to get access to all public posts and comments, along with user profile information. It's a 13-year data dump and allows us to get access to over 1 million messages and over 66,000 users. So here I show a typical conversation happened on this platform. So when members first get diagnosed, they join those support groups. They also communicate to discuss their disease. So as this example showed, the user was seeking support by writing, I was diagnosed with invasive ductal carcinoma grade 2. I'm told I will need chemo. I don't understand any words of that will help me wrap my hand around this nightmare. And as you can see, the community members come here. Some people try to provide a lot of feedback here, and others try to comfort those users. So based on a study 10 years ago, around 28 of internet users all over the world have participated in online support groups for a medical condition. And we can imagine this number increased a lot given the advances in the last 10 years. Then how could we support this large amount of people who use support groups with text communications? I argue that if we could figure out member social roles, then we can better match people who seek support with people who provide support. And they can also receive timely help, talk to support providers, and even talk to similar others. So again, here we want to answer two questions, like how to identify those social roles from their text, and then how those roles they occupy influence their participation. So again, what's the definition of social role? So building on prior work in the psychology field, I define social role as a cluster of interaction patterns regulated by expectations adopted by people in a social context to achieve specific goals. So this definition gives us 5 facets of roles. That is, we need to better understand what the people do, like what's their activities, their expectations, who are they, and then in what specific context, and then for what purpose they are doing such behaviors. Overall, my methodology can be abstracted into 3 boxes here. That is, the role construction is a repeated cycle of role postulation definition, and then you go to the identification stage where you can use all sorts of unsupervised modeling technique here, and then you kind of evaluate them. Again, this is a repetitive cycle. So in the following, I'm going to only focus on 3 components of my social role framework. From an interaction perspective, we look at their, actually 2 ways to look at their behaviors. We look at their activities from a graph perspective by constructing a network interaction graph to model who are talking to whom, and then who co-occurred together in the same thread. From a content perspective, we look at users' emotional aspects in language, their social concerns, and also like we did a topic modeling to figure out what are some topics they are talking with each other. We also consider the context here because users can discuss with each other in public discussion board. They can also chat with others in private chats. Our previous research showed that their discussion on those 2 different platforms are very different. They are very negative, talking about the more sensitive issues in private chats, while in public discussion board is more generic content. So from a goal perspective, here we look at the 2 types of support that the people are exchanging with each other. The first one is informational support. That is, people try to talk about advice, knowledge, referral with each other. And the second type is emotional support. That is, people try to provide care, empathy, encouragement to users. So specifically, we differentiate those 2 types of support into 7 conversational acts here. So we have people seeking emotional support, providing emotional support, providing empathy, appreciation, encouragement. We also look at how they exchange informational support. We trained machine learning models here based on human annotations. So because the nature of those messages, we asked nurse students from University of Pittsburgh to do the annotation here. And we saw that the machine learning models actually are highly correlated with human judgment, with an overall correlation above 0.6. We then can apply those models to estimate those goal-oriented supportive actions in the public and the private messages. So we extended the traditional machine learning methods here, but if data permits, people can also try to do this social support prediction through neural networks or even BERT or other models. So now we have a reasonable understanding of user behaviors. When it comes to identification stage, here we just use the Gaussian mixture model to do the clustering. So the idea here, or the assumption here, is that we want to guarantee that a user is a mixture of different social roles. And we have talked about how to get the user representation X here. And then the other important parameter here is that how do you select the number of roles? We actually went to back and forth to do this qualitatively and also quantitatively. So quantitatively, we look at the model's performance on a held-out test set. Qualitatively, we did several rounds of validation. I will talk about it later. So overall, we identified 11 roles here, and then we work with moderators from this platform to come up with those names. And as we can see, those roles are emotional support providers, newcomer welcomers, informational support provider, story share, private communicator, newcomer member, knowledge promoter. To just give you a more detailed description of what those roles mean, here are the 5 frequent roles in the community. As we can see, for emotional support provider, those are the people who provide a lot of emotional support to others, and they also provide appreciation, empathy, encouragement. Also, they participate in a large set of subforms. So each subform is associated with one cancer type. So which means that when people are occupy emotional support providers, they don't limit themselves to one specific form. For newcomer welcomers, those are the people who talk to a lot of users, and especially people who newly register. So I mentioned that evaluation is one important component here. So in our case, we did a full type of evaluation here. So we have quantitative measures in terms of model fit. We have qualitative measures by working with moderators. We also send out a large-scale survey where we received a 5,000 survey response to ask users how they self-identify themselves with each of the roles that we identified. We also incorporated those roles into downstream applications and found that those clustered results can help with recommendation. So I'm going to quickly talk about the qualitative side. So we work with moderators to assess the derived role. So basically, we showed them some users who occupy this role and then their representative messages. And then as one of them mentioned, it seems very comprehensive, and there are so many different examples. So I feel like it's covered very well with your different roles and labels. They also mentioned that one role we failed to identify are the placement. Those people complain to moderators when some people are doing something wrong. The reason, as I mentioned, is that there are not a lot of them, but they kind of stick in your memory since they are telling others what to do. So we went back to check this type of users, and it's just like a small set of users, and we are not able to capture it with the current modeling technique. So now we kind of get to know 11 functioning roles that the users occupy. What can we do with those roles? We know that the social role that the users occupy may influence their contribution. So an interesting follow-up here is to see how those roles influence their participation. So specifically, we look at the role evolution, that is role transition. We only look at users who stay on this platform for over a year, and then we compare their behaviors, role occupations in their first months, first to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, and then after a year. As you can see, people who occupy support seekers and story shares tend to decline over time. In contrast, they are more likely to occupy support provider roles, such as emotional support provider, informational support provider, and the private support providers. Again, we further interviewed 12 users from this forum to ask some of their experience. And as I mentioned, I initially stayed because information was important to me, but over time, I found that talking with people who had a similar experience is more helpful. And now I'm looking for people, helping people who are seeking for advice. So clearly, this kind of validated our findings that people change from roles that are frequently asking for help to roles that are offering resources to the community. So to sum up, we here introduced a model we introduced 11 functioning roles, and we also showed that members frequently change roles from ones that seek resources to ones that are offering help. Okay, so again, this is something we did with the social role work. So based on all these kind of findings, we work on automatic intervention on the lab side to improve users' interaction. So the goal of this intervention is that for patients, if they are new to the community, we try to connect them with newcomer welcomers. And if they are looking for specific support, we try to connect them with support providers, as well as connecting them with similar peers. So this is what the current interface will look like on the left side. So whenever users log in, we will show them the potential threats that may answer their questions, as well as some users that we identified would be a good person for them to talk to. When a person is looking at a specific threat there, we also do recommendations. Till last October, we deployed the system in January of 2018, and then over 11,000 people, patients and their caregivers have signed up and are using our intervention, so it's leading to real-world benefits. A follow-up analysis for a specific time period showed that our recommendation actually increased people's reading, and the people are now kind of 60% more likely to click the threads recommended by our algorithms compared to the initial setup. So the current stage we are on is to incorporate those social roles we identified to explain our recommendations to users. Instead of showing that you might be interested in, we are generating explanations on the fly, such as here are some newcomers you might want to say hi if this user is a newcomer welcomer, or here are some informational expert you could reach out to if this person is a support seeker. So to give a quick summary, we mainly look at those two lines of research. And I also work on some other work. So on the healthcare side, we look at how people exchange social support and what's their social role. Can we predict their depression, mental health outcomes from language? We also look at semantics of language, such as persuasion, humor. For example, I realized the second talk may be a little bit stressing, so here's something for fun. I once worked on this humor understanding, so it's a very essential component of our communication. And as you can see, those are some of the examples. We actually try to better understand what are the structures behind the humors. So it could be that people are trying to emphasize incongruity of language, or like creating ambiguity by using specific words here. In addition to kind of recognizing humor, I also develop models to extract the triggers of humor. That is, what specific text snippets in the language that trigger the humorous effects. So here are two cherry-picked sentences. So to conclude, I want to emphasize again that language includes both content and social information. And there has been a lot of work on the content side, and it's time for the NLP to move a little bit to the social interpersonal dimension. So here are some of the directions going on in my lab right now. So we want to understand how language use in different social contexts and how we could use it for mental health and well-being, as well as doing methods for socially low-resource settings by taking advantage of advances in unsupervised learning. So with that, I'd like to conclude my talk. Thank you. Yes, so this goes back to another question of technology use and different intentions. So again, similar to technology, like persuasion is just like a tool. It's like whether you use it for good purpose or bad purpose, it's mainly up to who is doing that and then what's their intentions. So as a researcher, I think we shouldn't just like stay away from this line of research, but we should proceed, again, as you mentioned, with a lot of ethical considerations. So in this case, we are not trying to create whatever persuasive engines. Instead, we're trying to look for some strategies that people use so that we can better help loan requests to grant their request, so that their projects can get funded. So we are not doing a lot of interventions there. But like you raised a good point about ethical considerations in the second work. That's actually a very also a context where we need a lot of attention. So we did several things. First, before each of those social applications, I would strongly suggest to go to check with the IRB and all sorts of like ethical institutions to guarantee that you are like advised to do a lot of things. We also did a lot of careful actions there. So first, I mentioned that there are both public discussion board and the private chats, right? So we never look at the private messages of users. Instead, we annotate their public messages and then apply the model to the private setting. Although there may be some kind of a domain difference, but it's like due to the ethical consideration. We could also do a lot of kind of recommendations where if we recommend the positive content, maybe we can influence people's positive behavior. But again, that's something we cannot proceed, right? So I think you raised a very good point, and then it's really necessary and essential to consider all potential ethical aspects before doing any of those work. Yeah, that's a great question. So we haven't assessed that part because first the role that we identified is more like a session level. That is, we assume that when users log in and then logs out during that specific time period, they have a role occupied. And then when it comes to a specific thread, it's really hard to see at this specific thread what type of role this user occupied, because we utilize a lot of context signals in addition to the message itself. And I think it will be very, very interesting to assess how the role of the message sender correlated with the message provider. So that kind of correlation will be very interesting. In the current kind of recommendation frameworks, the only kind of signal we can get is whether the user clicked that thread, whether the user talked to that person. So that's like our very high level meta information. But I agree with you that like doing something like a correlational matrix between role of senders versus role of receivers could provide a lot of insights. And it will also give a lot of feedback on how we want to generate those explanations to explain our recommendations. Yeah. So it's a long effort so far. So by deploying even a simple algorithm to an online setting, you have a lot of corner cases. For example, users who don't write, users who are new. So those are all the kind of cold start problems. And then we did a lot of kind of within participant experiment versus between subject experiment to kind of test effectiveness of the algorithm. So basically, it's like A/B testing. And then we also proposed like a novel graph-based recommendation algorithms, which showed a very strong results in terms of offline evaluation. But we are not able to deploy it in the online setting because not every server can afford the high and extensive computation that models used. So far we still stick to the matrix feature-based matrixization model because it's very fast. And also we have the consideration from the real-time aspects. So yes, we have better algorithms, but we cannot deploy it because of server limits. Any other questions? Okay.